I think I did quite a lot of videos about the X-H2S recently. I mean, for a good reason, it's an awesome camera. So I would say let's come to my final review of it after using it for about 4 months. And I want to start by something that I figured out that I think many people don't know yet, and that is that it is actually possible to select faces in video mode while doing face tracking and while recording, but it does not work like it should in my opinion. So let me explain. It is when you're in white mode, for example, in white tracking, and you don't have focus points, then it's not possible. It doesn't matter what you press on your camera, but it is possible if you use this zone autofocus mode where you have a single point essentially that you can move around, and then you can simply press the joystick here to move this point to another face, and then it automatically tracks the other face. But even there, it does not work when you move the camera around. Like, you really have to press the joystick. If you just move the camera so that the focus point is on another face, then it does not track the other face. It still tracks the face that it tracked before. But if you use the joystick, then that actually works. I mean, right now it's better to have it than not, but they could make a bit more usable in video. Same counts for touch tracking, by the way. When it comes to autofocus, I would really love to touch a subject on the screen so that it gets tracked then as it is on Sony cameras, for example. If that would be possible via firmware upgrade, that would be awesome, Fuji. So that was one thing that I figured out about the autofocus, but I got a lot more experience with it over the past few months. I filmed a group tour with it, which was a bit more complicated because the moment you have multiple faces in the shot, then it gets more complicated. I mean, 2 people are usually fine, especially if you use my insight there where you can use the joystick to select basically which face you want to track in zone AF mode. But if you have groups, for example, it becomes increasingly more likely that the camera doesn't really know what face you want to focus on, especially if you move the camera around or the people are moving. Aside from that, I would say that the autofocus overall is pretty reliable, but it's still not as good as Canon or Sony, simply at first because you don't have the full availability of touch tracking, etc. But also it is a lot more sensitive to custom settings. Where it also struggles is if you don't really tell the camera what it should focus on. Okay, I have to break the video up here a bit because I'm not happy. I just edited the review, or at least I've started editing it, and I had a look on some other footage that I shot here in my apartment, like A-roll footage, and I'm not that happy with the autofocus anymore. So to explain that, at the beginning when I used this camera, I went outside a lot, vlogging in F-Log 2, where I only film myself really for a minute or 2 at a time, and that hasn't really been an issue. Maybe I got one hand somewhere here and there, but not to a degree that it really ruined the video or that it actually matters. And I also shot videos here in my studio, but I always used the Turner picture profile back then, and that also did a really good job. I did not have any major issues with the autofocus then, but now all the past videos I shot in F-Log 2 here in my apartment, the A-roll part again. At first I got a lot of hunting there, and I thought it's just that I was maybe in the wrong mode, that I was in AF zone mode, and I had the focus point maybe somewhere at the bottom. Sometimes you don't see that after hitting the joystick accidentally. That could happen on this camera. So I recorded it again, and I again got a lot of hunting, just a bit less than before. So I thought, okay, maybe my AFC settings are not good, so I changed them. Recorded again, it also got a bit better now in the review, but I still had a hunt maybe every few minutes. And to be honest, as my main camera, that is actually kind of a deal breaker, because I have to film myself a lot, especially here in my studio, and I always want to film in F-Log 2. I don't want to switch between those profiles all the time. But what I must also say, when it comes to video quality and working with these cameras on travel videos, when I'm behind the camera mostly or doing some quick vlogging stuff outside, this camera always performed well over the past few months, and I must actually say still that this is the best hybrid camera that you can get. I mean, you have 26 megapixels, you have 4K 120 frames per second, you have ProRes, you have 10-bit in HEVC, 10-bit 4:2, you have all these film simulations, you have CFast Express Type B cards, which gives you a lot of storage space both for ProRes, but also if you want to record longer in HEVC. It's overall, I must clearly say, this is the best hybrid camera that you can buy way because it's kind of an A7 IV and an A7S III in one package. Like a high megapixel count for photos, but also that 4K 120 and all these other video modes that I just mentioned. And there's also another important factor that I want to talk about here, which is the fun of shooting. And I must say, from all cameras that I've ever used, the Fujifilm X-T4 was the best camera when it comes to fun of shooting. This is the camera, it sits on your desk and you look at it and you just want to grab it and go out and get some nice shots with it. And the footage from this camera also looked amazing, but back then the autofocus was just way too bad that I would consider it as my main camera as well, which is why I switched to Sony back then. Now the X-H2S came out where the autofocus is actually greatly improved, but still not perfect where I needed to be, and that's why I switched back to Fujifilm, hoping that I can get this X-T4 feeling with a better autofocus. But I must tell you, this is not perfectly the case. And I have a bit more fun shooting with it than with Sony, simply because of those film simulations when I use photos. I actually found myself shooting more photos just because of that. But this camera does not have the same feeling as the X-T4 because that retro dials and so on is just not on top. And this is not just for photo, this is also for videography in my opinion, because this design just attracts you. You want to shoot with a camera such as the X-T4, at least that's how I feel about it. And now Fujifilm, as we know, released the X-T5, and for video at least they kind of messed it up. We don't have a flippy screen anymore, we also have a crop in 4K, and these are both deal breakers for me. For Fujifilm, I really wish that you could bring out an X-T5S with the 26 megapixel stacked sensor from the X-H2S, maybe just remove ProRes and all of this super professional stuff and make this camera a bit cheaper then. Because having this nice X-T4 body just a little bit smaller, even with a flippy screen and with great video features, that would be amazing. And especially considering that the Tamron 11 to 20mm should come out soon, that could also be a really good vlogging setup for many people. But yeah, I bet that it's most likely not coming, and that's why I'm a bit disappointed actually. Like when I switched back from Sony to Fujifilm, I expected that I would get this Fujifilm feeling back, and it's not fully there. I got it a little bit with those film simulations, but it's not the same as when I shot the X-T4, and that's the dilemma I am right now. I overall love the X-H2S, but it's also not good enough workflow-wise to be my main camera. Now luckily I have two buddies. I have the one that's filming me right now, and I have that one here, and this is why I decided to keep one of those buddies, but I will sell the other one and get another camera as my main camera. And if you're curious about what this camera will be, it will not be a Sony camera again. I mean, Sony doesn't do anything wrong with their cameras. The dynamic range, the low light, and the overall video quality is also really good on Sony cameras. Maybe I would rate it 5% below Fuji overall, but not to a degree that you would actually notice the difference on YouTube. But Sony cameras to me always only felt like tools to get the job done, but their cameras never made me excited of going shooting, and this is why I will not switch back to Sony, which you might be able to guess already which will be the main camera in the future then, but we'll have to see about that. I'm not saying too much here right now, I first want to test it by myself. So to come to a conclusion here, overall I would still absolutely recommend the X-H2S for everyone that's looking for a good hybrid camera, especially if you don't have to film yourself that much, because still the footage that you get out of this camera is awesome, and what this camera offers for the price is just unbeatable right now. But I must also say that I know from experience that many creators that have to film themselves a lot would just prefer something like Sony or Canon just because of the autofocus, because it actually makes a difference. Like if you just can step in front of the camera without having to worry about that anymore, that actually helps a lot. So this is why I would say that still many people would be happier with Sony or Canon. And yeah, that's my conclusion about the X-H2S. If you don't film yourself that much, get this camera, it's amazing, but if you film yourself a lot, maybe better get another camera. And if you're interested in getting the Fujifilm X-H2S, check out this video in the corner. There you see more what you can actually do with it, how the footage looks like, or also my initial review where I talk more about the specs and how they actually perform in real life. This was more meant to give you an update of my thoughts about this camera after 4 months. Hope you enjoyed it. Also consider subscribing for upcoming videos, and I see you there.